Hi bookworms, Sorren here. I'm just dropping in quickly to let you all know that the Hidden Bookcase are now affiliates of bookshop.org. Bookshop.org is an online bookshop which financially supports local independent bookshops, and so it's a wonderful option if you're buying books as gifts for the upcoming holiday season, or if you're just supporting your own reading addiction. And if you buy through our storefront on bookshop.org/shop/the Hidden Bookcase for our listeners in the States, or uk.bookshop.org/shop/the Hidden Bookcase for our listeners here in Britain, don't worry, those links will be in the show notes, you'll also be supporting the show. We've even got a couple of special recommendations ready for you over there, so if you're on the hunt for your next read, why don't you take a look? Thank you so much for listening, and on to the episode.
Welcome to the Hidden Bookcase. Come in, have a seat, get comfy.
It's just next to the sliding library ladder and right below the shelf titled Urban Sci-Fi.
Pick a book, your favourite book. That's the one that opens this room. Inside you'll find a warm fire, a loving cat, and a wide skylight to the stars.
And a really towering to-be-read pile.
I'm Morgan, I use they-them pronouns, and I am a major security flaw.
I'm Sorren, I use he-him pronouns, and I am a semi-corporeal crow.
We've been friends for 10 years and are always swapping books.
But despite having the same taste in books, we never get round to reading each other's recommendations. It's always just another book on the pile.
It's a seriously big pile now. It might crush me in my sleep. So each month we're going to force each other to read a book.
The new reader will give a blind summary of the book. We'll both go away and read it, and then we'll return to chat about it.
So this week, let's get to talking about
In the Watchful City by Qiouyi Lu.
Sorren. Tell me about In the Watchful City.
In the Watchful City is a bio-cyberpunk novella following Anima, an enforcer of sorts who resides in the futuristic city of Aura. A has the ability to transfer air consciousness into any of the animals living within Aura's city limits, taking over their body and seeing through their eyes briefly. And the story begins when an outsider to the city named Vessel visits Air and offers to tell Air stories from beyond the city in exchange for Anima's own.
I think that's quite succinct.
And I found this book with you, actually. Morgan and I were on a lovely trip to Forbidden Planet, and I saw the cover, and I thought it looked cool, so I picked it up, and I looked at the back, and I'm going to be pretty honest, as soon as I saw neo-pronouns on the back, I was 99% of the way to buying it, and then it also sounded like a cool concept. At the time, it was only the second character I had come across that used neo-pronouns, I think.
Who was the first?
The first was actually Tak or Tak, I'm not sure, from A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers.
Yes.
Who only sometimes uses Z pronouns corresponding to what state their body is in at that moment. Z moves between what constitutes male and female for Z species over the course of the narrative, which is extremely cool, but arguably not quite the same thing as a human using neo-pronouns. Although, to be fair, I wasn't sure that Anima was human when I read the blurb, so that was a pleasant surprise.
I forget that there's a Neo, to be honest.
Yeah, they feel quite normal to me as well. Like, I know enough people that use them that I'm like, oh yes, a normal right now. So Morgan, shall we listen to your blind reaction?
We shall.
Okay, so In the Watchful City, I don't know much about this book, I'm going to be honest. I was with Sorren when he bought it, so I saw him read the back of the cover and get excited about it. But all I know about it is that the main character uses neo-pronouns. It's anthology-ish, but not really, meta-narrative. It's giving surveillance state kind of vibes, I'm imagining somebody in a tower with watching 100 screens and seeing all these different stories, and I'm thinking of a particular reference but I can't remember what it is, but anyway, that's fine. The cover is very vibey, surrealist. I'm obsessed with it. I have no idea what it means, but I'm obsessed with it, and I'm really excited to start this book. Yeah.
Was it the Panopticon that you were thinking of?
I don't think it was.
No.
I think it's probably just some generic DC TV show or something like that. You can imagine Batman or something like that in a cave with 1,000 screens up, watching the entire city. That was kind of the vibe.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no screens, but surveillance state, tick. Neo-pronouns, tick. Anthology, tick. There was magic. That was exciting. I didn't know there was going to be magic. Love a good sci-fi fantasy.
Yes.
Why have SF/F when you can have SFF?
Exactly, it's meant to be together. That's why people read it like that. Would you separate lovers? So, you mentioned the cover. The cover, to be fair, kind of tells you nothing.
It's so pretty. I'm assuming it shows the gleaming because it's gold.
Yeah, I assume it's supposed to be the gleaming. It kind of reminds me of Rangoli. I do assume that there was a reluctance to show any of the characters because, especially with Anima, you don't get a very clear idea on what Anima looks like. I was actually listening to an interview by the author, and they said that was quite intentional.
Who needs a physical form? That is the true non-binary instinct.
If I could dissociate into a pure light...
Wolf.
Excuse me. I mean, look, I would also hang around as an animal occasionally if that was the ability that was available to me. Can you say that you wouldn't want to just go for a fly?
I would. Let me fly.
You could be a cat for a bit if you felt like it.
Oh, yes. Just chilling, just vibing. Occasionally dissolving into light and masturbating for a bit.
As you do.
As you do. I have to say, wasn't quite expecting that scene.
Forgot about that. It also caught me off guard.
I think it makes sense to do in a book that's so about senses and sensuality. I think it counts as coitus in the forest. The vibiness of the scene, it feels forest-ish. So it was the one note I wrote in my phone. I was like, I think this counts. So I have to bring it up.
I agree with that.
Speaking of my notes, I can't believe in trying to sell this book to me, you didn't mention there was poetry.
I didn't want to. You weren't supposed to know.
I literally got to it and I was like, poetry?
Free verse poetry as well, which for those listening, I am a huge enemy of usually. I like it here. I think this is a good use of it.
This free verse poetry has structure, it has rhythm.
It does.
Because the main problem that free verse has in the modern day, there are certain takes on free verse that have become quite popular, which are just, let's put a random line break in a sentence and that makes it artsy. Whereas this has rhythm. All of the line breaks make sense. There's a lot of interesting use of space on the page, uses of brackets and uses of different lengths of stanzas. There's so much technicality in this poetry, specifically the one that Anima says about her childhood. It was my favourite part of the book, hands down. I highlighted like every single line. Fighters, dreamers, scholars who had disappeared one after another. I really liked the use of slashes in that to sort of give it beat. The uses of punctuation in this poem to give beat are so fun. But even though she broke apart bones, pounded them in the mortar with the pestle until the meal was fine as flour, that with all the different brackets symbolising the beating of the mortar and pestle, it's so vibey and fun.
The where, when, and then why being capitalised is like the most important question.
Yes. And then the way it's staggered across the page.
Set adrift being on its own.
I reread it multiple times just this bit.
I think it's a really interesting way to do a backstory, and it shows how quickly you can do a backstory because it's only a couple of pages. Not a lot of words on this couple of pages, but you get a really good sense of who Anima is. I love that Lu takes an experimental approach to writing to include poetry in it, and then also to include the little epistolary bit with the letters. It keeps you engaged, and it is a really interesting way of telling stories.
Honestly, we love variated form. You can have multiple forms in the same text. We should do more of that, I think. Anthologies like this are a great place to be that experimental. But the fact that the different forms aren't just limited to the different stories, because you have Anima's whole backstory being in poetry, which is in the meta-narrative. The meta-narrative and the narrative, they all bled together. Which I really love. Reading this is like reading a fever dream, but in like a good way.
Having read the Starless semi-recently for this podcast, it reminded me of that a little bit. But in a less tethered way. The Starless Sea has a pretty clear delineation between Zachary's narrative and the stories found within the book the narrative is centred around, at least to begin with, until you get other people's perspectives. But from pretty early on in The Watchful City is fluid, and the narrative will sort of spill over into an entirely new space without warning. There aren't any chapter breaks.
No chapters, just vibes.
Which if it was longer would probably be annoying, because there's not very many logical places to stop, but because it's so short, it gets away with it.
I had to read it over quite a few days because I was quite ill when I was reading it. Trying to figure out where to stop was quite difficult.
I think that's why I read it so quickly again, because I was kind of planning to read it more slowly, and then...
It just carries you along.
It does. Do you have a favourite of the short stories?
They were all so different and intriguing. I really liked the mermaid one because it had some mermaid lore, and who am I if not a fan of mermaid lore? And it was sapphic. Body horror, language world building, very good vibes. But I really liked the simplicity of the first one. I liked that it didn't have much of a plot. And especially as a first story, it has to pull you in enough. The glimpses of world building and just the characters being very rounded but mysterious was intriguing enough.
They have a lot of implied depth. You feel like you're looking at a very fully realised character despite spending so little time with them.
Yeah, it feels like peering very briefly into a world that you don't know, rather than the characters just appearing for you to experience them. Anima is glimpsing whole lives. So I think those two are I wanted to be compelled by the sports one, but I don't care about sports.
The sports one is also my least favourite. I was hoping that I would like it more the second time, but I just kind of found it hard to follow a little bit.
When I read All for the Game, and that has fantasy sports in it, I just gave up. I don't know the rules of normal sports, let alone fantasy sports, so I just go like, okay, cool, things are happening. Yeah. This is just a vehicle and a metaphor for the rest of the narrative. I don't need to understand.
It's something I've struggled with in a lot of similar books as well. I read The Passing Playbook recently, which is about a trans man trying to join his football team, and all of the football scenes I was glazing over. I think it's really difficult in this format. In sports anime, sometimes I can be invested in a sport, but I think seeing it visually and reading it is very different. I think it suffers from the same things as like fantasy battles can sometimes, but at least fantasy battles often have very high stakes.
I could tell that this was very visual, and I feel like if I could see an animated version of it,
Yeah.
then it would be quite compelling. I think trying to explain it in terms that make you visualize it
Yeah.
was too much for my brain. And I was like, I'm just going to vibe on the cool character and the world building. I really like that part of that short story.
I really enjoyed revisiting that one, actually. It was a bit of a shock the first time. I think this is the first time I'd come across fit binding in fiction described to that extent at all. So I was very taken aback by it. And then I was very taken aback by the tone in which it gets espoused. It's a very neutral / positive look at it from that character's point of view. And I think that freaked me out a bit on the first read. On a second read, I find that I like it a lot more. I feel like Lu is trying to give you a narrative and give you characters' feelings about things, and as a narrator, not ascribe judgment and leave you to make your own decision, which I think a lot of authors could benefit from. But I think I'm so used to, if you see something like that in fiction, the narrative voice itself goes out of its way to condemn it.
I did really like the scene of the enforcers coming into the school and being like, unbind your feet.
Yeah.
And everyone being like, no, and like being really pissy about it. I thought that was quite a fun scene.
Yeah.
Even if foot binding is something that I don't understand this, but okay.
I think it's very natural to have a very visceral reaction to a child going through painful permanent alterations to their body, which they're not old enough to consent to, I would say. But I also think it's also something that's been very weaponized as evidence that a group of people is backward, even though there's very similar traditions across the world. FGM, circumcision, there's like lots of parallels that you could draw. I've just started Babel, and they also have a scene there where the protagonist gets questioned about it. Interrogated, really, in what's transparently a very racist way.
Yeah, I read Babel literally just before reading this, but I do like what Lu does with it a lot.
And also having a disabled character who has invented her own mobility aids and adjusts them as she likes and is able to do sports with them, which also had me thinking the Paralympics being separated. Why do we do that? That's something I'd taken for granted for so long.
Apart from the sports, I really did like that story.
The competition is really stiff because they're all really good.
Yeah. And like, I wasn't compelled by the one with all the documents and the notes.
Oh, see, that's my favourite one.
But I love the dynamic between the two rulers, the duarchs.
Yeah, I think that is why it's my favourite one. So
it's giving codependent. It's giving I know you more than I know myself. Why is it your favourite?
I think the duarch thing is such an interesting idea. Also, just the tragedy of it, these letters that aren't going to be answered.
Yeah.
Apparently, I just love to be sad.
Who's your favourite character, Sorren?
Why are you pouncing on me first? Is it because I asked you first?
Yeah, we're taking turns.
Okay, fine. I think it is Anima. Maybe because you get to spend the most time with her. The way that you get to know Aura is through Anima. It's a very interesting perspective on the city, and I feel like the city and Anima become quite intertwined. People say, oh, if it's like a really successful setting, it feels like another character. I feel like in this case, Anima and Aura are kind of interlinked in that way, where Anima kind of becomes the setting. And the setting is very cool. And Anima's how I experienced the setting. How about you?
I really liked Vessel.
Vessel's so cool.
Yeah, I just thought she had such a cool aesthetic and such a cool vibe and such a cool role in the narrative.
I wish I had
the
a snake. Yeah.
And the vibe coming in and being like, let me teach you about the surveillance state that you are helping to run.
Lu has also talked about how, while leaving Anima very vague in appearance deliberately, A wanted to make Vessel like more, in inverted commas, traditionally feminine, so that A could be like, this is still a non-binary character. I guess I didn't even notice it when I was reading, but if a cis person were to read this and they were less accustomed to the idea that clothes don't necessarily dictate gender, that clothes don't inherently have gender, then maybe it would make something click for them.
I did love that all the main characters were non-binary and they all had different neopronouns. That was so cool.
It's so fun. You
Yeah.
get to learn new ones. I mean, at least for me, I got to learn new ones. And
Yeah.
I like that it doesn't try to explain it, because you can just learn it by osmosis.
And there's no like, here are my pronouns. It's just like, we're just going to assume that everybody knows everyone's pronouns.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
It's a surveillance state, so I'm pretty confident that at least Anima can probably look at people and know their pronouns.
I just flicked open to Vessel's description and just
Hmm.
like green and gold as the dress, butterfly pin into her hair, the vibes. I find it quite hard to visualize character appearances, but I had such a distinct visualization of Vessel throughout the whole book.
I like that we get to have different outfits for Vessel as well.
Yes.
It's what she deserves.
Meanwhile, Anima's sitting around in like
In the pond water.
Vessel coming in being like, you live like this?
I know Anima is human, but I still picture her as kind of like a swamp creature a little bit, just like webbed feet.
I'm imagining the Vessel coming in and then Air just like sitting in the pool up to their eyes.
Yeah.
The jungle vines that are connecting them to the gleaming, like coming out through like hair and just drifting in the back.
Very good visual image.
It's so sensory.
It is, yeah. The food.
We love food in world building.
I love the twin suns. That's so cool. And it doesn't have that thing of absolutely refusing to give you any exposition. It's just like, here's fourth light. We've got twin suns. You're just going to have to understand. That's my preferred method. Don't explain anything to me. Just go for it.
I wanted more of the world. Like, I know that that's the point, but I did want more. There was so much under the surface.
If Lou would just like write another book set in this world.
Second anthology, let's go. Maybe for a Vessel POV this time or something.
Ooh, mhm.
Or Enigma POV. I would read that. I would read that so fast.
I know that he is literally called Enigma, but I definitely wanted to know more about Enigma.
There's so much implied backstory between Enigma and Anima, which I want to know. Anima doesn't really like Enigma, but then they also seem to be really good friends.
They were the only recruits of the same age when they joined the hub.
There's this bit at the very beginning where Anima's like, oh, of course it's Enigma. God
Yeah.
damn it. And I'm like, can we have the beef? Because later on, you seem like besties.
I think it's more of like a friendly rivalry thing.
That's my favourite trope. Give me more, please.
And it's really interesting that Enigma makes that decision to stay, but kind of encourages Anima to leave by saying it has to be your decision. More Enigma content.
More everything content, please. Give me a second book.
Lou also writes poetry, and I'm desperate to track some of it down, but I haven't been able to find any of it yet.
I love it when poets write prose because they always write it like poetry, and it's so satisfying to read. It's all about feeling and aesthetic. I just read Our Wives Under the Sea, which I also mentioned I'll give in the episode. That is also written by a poet. It feels like a liminal space, reading books written by poets.
Yeah.
Is the best way I can describe it. It feels like, you know, when it's 9 p.m. in the middle of summer and it's still light and everything's really warm and vibey and it feels like the walls between worlds are really thin. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because poets are less focused on narrative and like a traditional action leads to next action sort of thing. And there is that willingness to linger on those quiet moments. For example, a moment where Anima retreats into the Gleaming to have some alone time. In a normal narrative, you might be like, well, that's extraneous, I need to cut it. But from a more poetic point of view, you can get a lot of character out of those moments.
Yeah, the quiet moments are the point, rather than the deleted scenes.
Yeah. I did find it interesting coming back to that, like, this narrative doesn't really try to, like, give you a point of view. It's really just about Anima's point of view and how that changes over the course of the novel. The surveillance state portrayal, especially like in cyberpunk novels and video games, is like always portrayed one as like a very technological, soulless thing that's like very disconnected from nature. So this is like a very different spin on it in that way. And then also as something very inherently negative. Whereas I feel like this at least gives you some ideas as to how it could possibly be used positively in theory. I definitely don't think it's being used for good in Aura, because you can see that it's being used to like keep lovers apart. Lou was talking about how A was part of a trip to China and got to see new surveillance technologies, but the thing that really struck Air about it was the attitude that people had as like, oh, this is something that will keep us safe. And I think when you give that kind of like more nuanced, balanced argument, if you are coming out at the end and saying, actually, this is probably for the worse, if you're a part of the system, you're probably not contributing positively and you should leave it, it kind of strengthens that argument because you're allowing all sides of the argument to breathe.
Throughout the novel, it's not actively trying to push you in particular ways. A lot of books these days don't trust the reader to come to their own conclusions. They sort of shove down your throat, this is the conclusion I want you to come to. There's no moralizing.
Yeah, and I think also using experimental forms plays into that because, for example, the narrative with the documents and the letters, there's no narrative voice to be like, this is what you should take away. You're just hearing different characters' perspective. The onus is completely on the reader to draw what themes they will from that. While we're talking about the heavier themes in the book, I found it interesting that it explored mental health as a public health issue. There's a quote, I'm going to paraphrase, what good is a city that can't even keep its citizens from taking their own lives? I just thought that was interesting because there is that trend, I suppose, of people talking more about mental health, but talking about it very much as an issue that is on the self to fix. Oh, you're not doing enough self-care. Oh, you just need to go get on these meds. I'm definitely not saying that self-care and meds are unhelpful. Psychology degree, please do self-care, and if you need meds, go get them. But it's undeniable, if often overlooked, that your environment also contributes to your mental health. The society you live in is going to be a part of that. I liked that was sort of brushed upon.
Yeah.
I think that's what I like about this. It brushes on so many things in such a short space of time.
It makes them feel obvious, treats them as a fact of the world building. It's sort of like, yeah, of course. Any power that has the ability to change things should be able to do stuff like this.
Yeah, any responsible, humane society. We're running a little low on time, so are there any quotes that you wanted to highlight before we wrap up?
This is actually one thing I really liked. Maybe you can write something down instead, whether truth or fiction, that has always helped me. It doesn't so much remove the pain as it domesticates it into something you can coexist with. I really like that, because there's a lot of argument on the internet these days about why would you write fiction to explore something real world like racism or mental health when you can just read and write non-fiction about it, because that's more quote unquote true. Putting aside all the like non-fiction is a lot less accessible than fiction is, sometimes you don't want to read that raw, awful truth. Sometimes you need to learn about it through a lens that is removed. And also, the person who is writing about it needs to be able to explore it in their own way and at a safe distance. I just had a lot of feelings about that quote, because I've never seen it put into such good terms. I've tried to explain it before to people, and it's never come out right. And that was just a really succinct and good way of describing it.
Yeah, I absolutely couldn't agree with you more. There's a comic by Erin Rosenberry called Fantasy is a Metaphor for the Human Condition, and I think that phrase sums up the power of fiction. The reason that fiction is so powerful is because it can have universality. Any story with fantastical elements, even if that fantastical elements is something as simple as a metaphor is a story. If you say, I watched my friend turn into a monster, obviously you're not talking literally, but there's a reason that even non-fiction taps into that. It's because it's more effective, it's because it's more evocative, it's because it connects with you on an emotional level that's different to saying, I watched my friend become a bad person. And fiction can reach people who won't pick up non-fiction. People who are racist don't tend to read books about anti-racism. This whole argument is just so baffling to me.
Yeah.
So, Morgan,
Mm-hmm.
what are your final thoughts on In the Watchful City, and how would you rate it?
I rated it 5 out of 5. It was interesting. It was vibey. It was fun. It made me feel things. That's all I ever really ask for a book, is that it makes me feel things, as long as the feelings aren't, this is awful. Yeah, that's all I ever really want from a book, is for it to evoke emotion.
Yeah.
This one does it so well. Beautiful to read, which is another thing I love. And it had some good things to say. Despite it being quite outside my genre, I'm not really an anthology person much.
Yeah.
I still really, really enjoyed it. Well, what about you, Sorren?
This is also a 5 out of 5 from me. The first time I read it in one day. But when you read something that quickly, you're kind of wondering if you're just swept along, and therefore biased towards it. Having read it again, strong on every front, as you said. Its prose is beautiful. It's got so many interesting ideas in it. It doesn't talk down to its reader. It's a beautiful setting. It's got wonderful world building. It's got experimental form, and it uses experimental form really well. I really like it.
However, can you recommend anything like it?
If you liked the anthology aspect of this, if you liked the fact that this was very unapologetically queer, All Out, compiled by Saundra Mitchell, which is an anthology series of a bunch of queer writers writing young adult historical fiction. It touches on a wide range of themes. All Out's just a great collection with some really great authors. I should probably mention that All Out is the first in a series of anthologies, and the most recent one out there just came out, and that one is science fiction.
That's fun.
I just haven't read it yet. Morgan, what would you recommend for this episode?
If you enjoyed the all non-binary protagonists, and if you enjoyed the long conversations about the meaning of life, I'm going to recommend A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. It's also sci-fi, a little bit post-apocalypse vibe, exploration of the meaning of life, the universe and everything, trying to figure out the point to things. And it's also that sort of soft, cozy sci-fi, more vibes than plot conversations between people trying to figure things out.
What are we reading next?
We have a guest on to talk about Dreadnought by April Daniels. One of the queer classics. Neither of us have read this book this time, so it's even more spicing it up from our last guest. So very excited to read that. And until then, you're always welcome through the bookcase.
Don't forget to scratch the cat on your way out. Thank you for listening to The Hidden Bookcase, a production of Planar Prod. On this episode, you heard Morgan Greensmith and Sorren Briarwood discussing In the Watchful City by Qiouyi Lu. You can find out more about this book at s.qiouyi.lu, and you can follow Lu at sqiouyilu on Twitter. You can find the Hidden Bookcase on Twitter at Hidden Bookcase, and on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, and TikTok at Hidden Bookcase Podcast. Find out more about Planar Prod at planarprod.com. Know what we should read next, or want to chat to us about what you thought of this episode's read? You can reach us at thehiddenbookcase@gmail.com or send us a DM on social media. We'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying The Hidden Bookcase, please consider leaving us a rating or review, or you can always tell a friend how to find us. Your whispers are the best way for bookworms to discover our show. On our next episode, which will be out on Monday the 21st of November, we'll be discussing Dreadnought by April Daniels. We hope to see you then, and in the meantime you're always welcome through the bookcase.